Without being a complete contrarian, I just want to point out that if it were me, I would choose to live in a gunfight. It's different than the filmmakers. They have a different plan in mind. But again, if it were me, I would choose to live in a gunfight. And that's okay. Howdy. I'm Jeff Goldsmith, and this is the Q&A. My agenda is simple. Each week, I plan to bring you in-depth insights into the creative process of storytelling. And folks, today, I'm very pleased to have with me director Collin Schiffli to chat about his latest film, Die in a Gunfight. Yes, it's different from the way that I would have done it, but die in a gunfight it is, kids. And this was a fun one. We did this with Lionsgate as a virtual screening, which meant the people that had signed up on the email list all got invites. They got a free link to see the movie and the Q&A in advance. And you could sign up to get invites too by going to backstory.net/events. And it's just a free email list. So you'll only get an invite when we have an invite, and you'll get an occasional newsletter that tells you what else we're doing over at Backstory. And we've been doing a few of these screenings with Lionsgate, and they've been a lot of fun. So go sign up, kids, if you're interested. But look, we had a really good chat with Collin about his creative process for making this film, and now is a very strange time for independent cinema. So if you see the film and you like it, definitely go on social media about it to help spread the word about it. It's important. We're still in a pandemic, and it's up to you to help other cinephiles find cool films during this very strange release period that we're in. So thanks for spreading the word. Without a doubt, Collin was very forthcoming about his creative process and what it took to get this film made, so I know you'll dig this episode. And speaking of things to dig, I hope you check out Backstory Magazine over at backstory.net. You could read us on a desktop or laptop or via our iPad app, Backstory. Now, folks, we are practically a week away from publishing our Black Widow issue. We wanted to give everybody a chance to see the film. It is very spoiler specific about Black Widow, so there are spoilers within, and we have a lot of other really cool content too. And one of the things that we do that we are especially doing with this issue is because we are a digital magazine, we are able to do what I call post-publishing, which means we could put out the entire issue and still slide new articles into it. So movies that have yet to come out that we are going to have very in-depth spoiler-specific articles on will arrive in that same issue. And you'll see some of them mentioned in the table of contents, and some of them will just pop up new once we add the article, once we know that the interview is done and it's going in. So it's something that I've been doing a lot more of in the pandemic, as release schedules are so strange. And it's just one of the other many things that I think is fun about Backstory Magazine. But don't take my word for it. You could go check it out yourself, because you could read the free issue. And if you decide you like what you see, I hope you'll consider becoming a subscriber. And if you do, you could use coupon code SAVE5. That will save you $5 off a 1-year subscription to Backstory Magazine, and we'll give you any of the articles we publish within that year, and also give you access to our archive. So look, it would really mean a lot to me to have my podcast listeners in iTunes and Spotify, and my YouTube watchers of the Zoomcasts that we are putting up on the Backstory Magazine YouTube page consider becoming subscribers to my passion project. So thanks for considering. But now, without any further ado, let's jump right into our Q&A with director Collin Schiffli about his latest film, Die in a Gunfight. Okay, well, Collin, it's good to see you, man. How's it going?
It's going well. Good to see you too. Thank you for having me on here.
Yeah, thanks for coming. And so half of our crowd, they just saw it as a virtual screening through Lionsgate. So they know the whole movie because they literally just saw it. But we're going to start spoiler-free first when this becomes a podcast, and we'll make a clear announcement when we get into our spoilers for those folks. But we always like to start with kind of breaking in stories. And to my knowledge, you went to Columbia College in Chicago. And you focused on film directing. What were some of the things that were eye-opening to you during that kind of film school experience? And did you have a good experience? Because some people love it. Some people tell me that they absolutely hate it.
Sure. Yeah. I think it's kind of relative to everyone's experience, especially when it comes to like a art school, you never know what you're going to get. And I loved it. I mean, I love Chicago. I grew up in Indiana. So Chicago is my stepping stone into the bigger world. I feel like if I would have just made the leap to LA, I would have probably been overwhelmed and found myself retreating back. But Chicago is just such a beautiful city, and being able to, the film community there is really rich, and really the infrastructure is, really there. And the school was a great experience. Going to Columbia, I actually do have, some of those cliche things of like having some mentor type teachers that saw something, at least I read it that way, saw something in me that they helped nurture and pushed me. And so I had a really good experience. But, of course, this was now I graduated in 2009, I think. It's such, everyone always asks, what's your advice? Should I go to film school? And I'm like, I don't know. Like, the world's such a different place. We have access to so many things. Sometimes it is good just to be thrown into it with the, thrown in with the wolves. And that's your film school. I've learned just as much just being out here, jumping from project to project. So, but it was a good experience for me.
What was your favorite thing that you picked up about directing in film school? Something that kind of maybe stuck with you, that influenced your creative habits thereafter, if there was such a thing?
Yeah, I think for me, it was definitely learning how important it is to find the people that you work well with. It used to be like, oh, you got to work with the best of this and this. And it's like, well, that's important. You want to make sure they know what they're, you work with people that know their craft. But I think I learned more like, oh, it's so important to see who you get along with, or who challenges you, or who you can be transparent with. I think that's what I took away, because, it'd be like you saying, hey, can you come paint my house? And if I can't pick the tools or the person to help me do it, then if you pick it, might turn out all right, but I don't know, and sure. I think that was my biggest lesson. Find the people you work well with and try to stick with them.
So one of the most traumatic things that could happen to somebody is graduating film school. And, you went and you PA'd for a few years after, and I saw that you were a PA briefly on Christopher Nolan's The Dark Knight Rises. What was just some observations that you had rolling around that set? And if you got to see Nolan at work, or if you were just like so far removed that you were like, photocopying in the office or something strange with coffee.
No, it was amazing. Like of course, like when you get, you just got to like dive into anything you can, whether it's like, I worked on Old Navy commercials. I worked on, super small indie movies, but that was probably the peak of the largest. And I got pulled into that because we had just finished the whole summer I was coordinating like a $1 million film, smaller budget things. And from that, it's funny, the higher ups on those indie movies are the kind of the PAs on the giant studio movies. But I got pulled onto it, and it was so cool because, it was day like 104 or something of them filming. So I'm just watching. I just get to join for like a week or two. And they had been shooting around the world, and we did the LA unit, which was kind of a chase, bat pod chase through the streets of downtown. So I'm literally watching, there's 500 PAs. My job was literally just to say, hey, you can't walk here, because they had closed off 10 blocks of the city. And you're watching literally a helicopter filming the bat pod racing. And you're just like, how do they do this? How is this, how do they coordinate this stuff? And what was amazing is it feels massive and feels intimidating, but at the same time, you talk to everyone's professional. And of course, like I said, I was just literally closing off streets and telling people, no, this isn't Batman, even though Christian Bale's literally walking around right down there. But I got to see, like, when we ate on a rooftop. I remember lunch every day in the middle of the night was on a rooftop, and Christopher Nolan was right there amongst all the people. Kind of, you could tell that they're in their own little world, probably thinking about how to tackle the next shot, but they're right there. You're like, I cannot believe Christopher Nolan, like one of the masters of our generation, working filmmakers. And yeah, it's like, it's inspiring. It's like, it wasn't exhausting. Even though you're working all night, you're just like, I could do this forever in a way, even though I want to go, inspires you to want to dive into your directing projects, but you're just like, wow, I'm literally watching history unfold in front of me.
That's awesome. We're going to get to Die in a Gunfight in a couple minutes, but before we do, I still want to give people a little more of a baseline about you. Your
Sure.
directorial feature debut, you had done some shorts, but your feature debut was the 2014 movie Animals.
Yeah.
And I'm curious, just if you could encapsulate in any way, What was your kind of biggest lesson from, being jumped right into the fire on your first feature film that kind of maybe was eye-opening and helped you continue as a director on your next project?
Well, I think part of it, going into it knowing that what I mentioned before about film school, surrounding yourself with people that are like-minded and are after the same goal, and you have each other's backs. I had that going into it, and I think what the eye-opener for me was, you're never prepared enough. You just need to prepare and prepare and prepare to the point that the movie should be done when you show up to film it, if that makes sense.
Like, sure, it's what people commonly refer to as the Hitchcockian method.
Yeah,
such that your biggest decisions are made in advance rather than on the set.
Exactly. That way, when you show up on set, you're so prepared that you can either throw it all out the window because, it's raining and it's not supposed to be raining, or we lost that actor, or the location fell through. You know how to adapt so fast, and or it goes according to plan, and you all know what to do, and you've talked it to death. I think that was kind of the biggest eye opener. Like, I tried to be as prepared as I could, but I would say, like, learning how to go, whether you're reading or going online or watching the behind the scenes of something, which we all do forever. If you're a filmmaker, you love movies, you kind of are getting that, no matter what. But I say go in with specific intentions and try to find the things that you think will apply to what your project is. Our movie, that Animals, was two people wandering around the city, mostly in a car. And so I was like, what movies do that? What great 70s films where they have long lens down the street, don't have a permit, had to make it work. You go seek those out. And I was seeking out all those tips from all the classic directors going into it, being like, how did they tackle this way back when, and trying to apply it. And I think that stuff, was invaluable because it prepared me and prepared everyone else.
And what was your budget and schedule for it?
Our schedule, it was crazy. The budget going into it was $180,000. We finished shooting at $180,000. So it was nothing. At the time I was like, $180,000. This is crazy. This is a lot of money, but it's nothing. And we had 23 days of shooting. Again, it was mostly always our two leads were there every day. And then we had like the day players coming and going. But it was kind of this, again, another lesson, I guess, is learn how to leapfrog. It looks like the characters are halfway across town. Maybe the scene takes place halfway across town, but we learned to be like, dude, we can shoot in this alley. They're setting up right under the train tracks right over there, but it feels, the scene takes place, in story order somewhere totally different. So you kind of learn to leapfrog and figure out how to, we literally had 75 locations in that movie.
Wow.
And that just, it seems like I'm making that up. I swear we had like an extra hour in each day somehow or something, but because my second movie, we had like 19 days of filming and like half the amount of locations, and it was 10 times harder for some reason. And yeah, I think you just kind of roll up your sleeves and you make the most of every situation. And that's what we did. It's just like,
that makes sense.
We were like, we had no choice but to do it.
Okay, so 4 years later, and this is the last thing before we get to die in a gunfight, you made All Creatures Here Below. Yep. And it's an interesting movie about criminals that want to relocate to Kansas City, right? I grew up in Kansas City. I got to tell you, even if I were a criminal, I don't think I want to relocate there right now. I'm kind of loving Los Angeles. But what was your lesson on that? Because it's your second feature. You have one under your belt. Tell us the budget and schedule and what your biggest lesson on that movie was.
Yeah. So that movie, it was like a spiritual sequel to Animals in a way, because it's written by the same actor, David Dastmalchian, and he wrote it and he stars in it. And it's about trying to learn about the people on the fringes of society, the people that don't get the spotlight, that we're so quick to judge and condemn. And that's both films really. And it's that movie especially, they're just making decisions that frustrate you and they're spiraling out of control. But for me, it was like, okay, we have more money. It was about a little over $1 million, which is, huge compared to 180,000, 200,000. And it's tough because it's like, you got to learn. I was trying to learn, how do we make that show up on screen? How I want that to be on screen. Just because you have more money, doesn't always mean it's reflected on the image of the scope of the film. And that was frustrating. That was hard for me because, the more money you have, that means it's broken down differently. Actors get more money, or you got to have the trailers and the things that kind of go with scaling up. And of course that's great because you want everyone to be comfortable. You want everyone to be paid. You want everyone to feel like they're at, have the proper workspace to do their best work. But it was hard for me because you're walking this line of why can't I just go run over there and there's pigeons? We need pigeons. Let's just go film it, and everyone was a little more like, oh, can't go do that. It's that world of the blurring the line between indie and studio world of doing things by the book, and doing things kind of guerrilla style. And, a lot of us, me in particular, but a lot of our generation we're from that. We all have our phones here. We all can film in 4K right now. Like you just go wing it. You do it guerrilla style if you have to. You do what you got to do. But it was a challenge because it was navigating that. Okay, I'm in a bigger world. How do I play by the rules, but also know the rules enough to break them when I need to get what we need? And it was still a lot of fun. Obviously, everyone was down to roll up their sleeves and get dirty. And because those movies are so heavy, they're dramas, they're gritty. I wanted the sweat and blood and tears to be visible on screen. So that all still happened regardless, because that's what happens with indie films. But it's the whole, like, just because you have more money doesn't necessarily mean you can make a better movie.
Right.
You got to navigate.
That's interesting to hear that you're saying that $1 million was considered like, formalistic for a movie rather than guerrilla, when some filmmakers consider that to still be the kind of guerrilla filmmaking stage, So that's a trip.
Absolutely. And not to get ahead of myself with Gunfight, but I'll say the same thing about that. That was, 4 or 5 times as much as that. And it's still like, to me, it's like, how do you walk this line? Because
let's jump into it. Like, you never said how many days though. How many days did it get for All Creatures?
All Creatures was only 19. And looking back, I wish we had the 23, because it's like,
gotcha.
You need one more day to do that. Scenes that should have been 2 days worth of filming, you get like 3 takes, 4 takes, 5 takes maybe on the specialty shots, which is fine. I'm not the type of filmmaker that would want to do Kubrick 75 takes or whatever. I'm just like, no, I think we got it. Let's move on. But again, I like to be like, oh my, look, the sun's setting. That's beautiful. Boom. You down to just grab that. Let's be able to navigate this according to so you can capture that lightning in a bottle. Not, you can, like you said, be so prepared that you can throw out the storyboard or throw out the plan. And that's hard when people spent money on that, or someone said, well, we set this up for that reason. And it's like, well, I didn't know the sun was going to be so beautiful right now. Let's figure out how to make the best of both worlds. And, a lot of when the unions get introduced and all that stuff, of course you need that stuff. It's great. It's there for a reason. But, as an art, I look at it as an art form, and it's not just making a factory commercial, a Coca-Cola product. It's like, you sometimes don't know what you're going to get. But if you can convince everyone you're prepared enough that you will get it, you're going to get the movie. It's going to get in the can. You're going to make a good, successful film. You're going to capture what you set out to do. But know that if you know the rules, you can break them. I know we hear that stuff our whole lives, but it's like so true in the moment. It's like in the moment you don't realize it. You're like, oh, this is one of those moments that I need to break the rule because otherwise it's going to be a missed opportunity.
Well, let's jump into Die in a Gunfight. Tell us how you came across Andrew Bearer and Gabriel Ferrari's script for Die in a Gunfight.
Sure.
And jumped on board as director.
So it's crazy. I actually, within a few days of each other, I think I read All Creatures Here Below and Die in a Gunfight. And it's just funny. I remember thinking, all right, of course I want to do both of these. They're both great. It's whichever one goes first. And funny enough, All Creatures happened first, but Gunfight was just because it's a bigger movie, and mainly because it's an ensemble piece. I feel like I've learned a lot about how long it takes to cast, not just because someone might say yes or no, but because of everyone's schedule, especially like the more actors you have that need to be on scene together, in a scene together. It's like, well, how do you get their schedules to work when you're competing with, they're shooting Marvel movies or whatever, it's like, right. Well, naturally that takes precedent over our little thing, but maybe they really want to do it. It's just like it kept being this kind of heartbreaking. We have 4 of the 5, but you need the 5th one to get it greenlit for the money to go into the bank and for this or that. And it was a long process. It took 6 years of that, where we were filming. Wow. I was literally in Toronto for a month, meeting people, setting up things with the line producer. And then we shifted to Romania, and then we shifted to Boston, all because of like, tax credit here, or the dollar goes further here. And, as the creative, you're like, of course, I'm down to play ball, and whatever gets the movie done, I'm down to make it work. And let those aspects cover themselves. But it's pretty soul crushing when you're like, you have 4 of the 5 pieces and then it falls apart. So by the time it actually does happen, you're like, is this really happening? What have I lost sight of the creative, So yeah, I can't remember where I was going with that one, but it was, I got the script, the same time as All Creatures. And what I loved was that it was a far cry from my other 2 films. I want to make all kinds of movies. I don't want to be pigeonholed into one thing. And I was like, look, this is a chance for me to put my money where my mouth is, and try to tackle something that's out of my wheelhouse in a way. It was heartfelt. It had a lot of the elements that I'm familiar with in terms of themes like love and redemption and all these kind of things that I like to explore. But it was, there was an opportunity there. Like everything was so bold and witty and tongue in cheek and, not gritty, not grounded. They had those elements. There's some groundedness to the love story, but there was such, outlandish humor and style that I was like, wow, I think it's cool that the writers, Andrew and Gabe, can see something in me that can, that I can bring to it, even though my work doesn't necessarily reflect that.
That's awesome. I mean, so you said you had to bounce around a lot. Where did you end up shooting, and what was your final budget and schedule?
We ended up shooting in Toronto at the end of the day, because ultimately it is kind of a nod to big city life. We needed a big city New York feel, but Toronto, a lot of films, cheat New York, and it's a beautiful place to work. And I'm familiar with Chicago. My first movie was Chicago. Obviously, I went to school there. It felt like it was a twin city to Chicago, very similar. But the film infrastructure is so incredible there. They have so many resources and such a talented pool of people to pull from. So it was like a no-brainer. It's like, okay, this makes sense. We got to shoot here. Once we finally got all our ducks in a row, it's heartbreaking because it fluctuated the budget. I don't know how much I want to.
Okay, whatever you're comfortable with.
At one time it was a $10 million movie. At one time it was an $8 million movie. And again, as any opportunity you get to make a movie, it's for me, I think, again, of the generation of like, dude, I'm just down to make movies. Like, I just want to tackle it any way I can. And if I make a $200 million movie one day, I know everyone's like, yeah, you're never going to do this. But I swear I will go back and make a $200,000 movie too, again, because why not? Because I love doing it. And
so what did it turn out to be, and what was your schedule?
It was a 23-day shoot. So it was the same. We're doing this ensemble, giant stylized, larger than life world in the same amount of time that I filmed, a 2-person walking around the streets of Chicago, guerrilla style movie. And I remember just being like, how are we going to do this? I'll just say that it was half the budget that I thought it was going to be.
Okay.
Which is fine, because we all, creative challenges come with it. Like, we're still going to tackle this, It
looks beautiful. I mean, whatever you had to work with, you got a very beautiful looking film on the screen. And I guess that would be one place to start, creative habits. As we said, preparation is important. Tell us how long you had to prepare and some of the touchstones of some of the preparation that you do before you get to set, be it shot lists, be it location scouting and redoing shot lists, et cetera, and or rehearsal, if you had any time for that too.
Yeah.
A lot of independent films do not.
Right. We actually did not. I don't think I've ever had rehearsal time. We find, to make up for that, it's getting together, just being able to go get brunch with the actors and just talk it to death, talk the characters out, kind of flesh out how you might tackle a scene. And that's what, for me, like how you, again, it's coming up with creative solutions. If your hands are tied and maybe you've seen like, oh, this is how it's done, we can't quite do that. Well, what's our version of that? And I'm a very, as you can tell, I can ramble and talk about, I'll make movie references that people are like, well, I have no idea what you're talking about. What is that? How does that apply to this shot? So for me, it's all about the visuals. Like, film is a visual medium. It's like, how do you convey what you want visually. And that's literally whether that's pointing at colors, a color scheme. For me, it's about making lookbooks, pitch decks, visual guides that showcase every potential outcome of how you want this to be, so that, you have your parameters here. Let's not go too far this way. Let's not go too far this way. But yeah, I love to storyboard. I literally draw, and I storyboarded, I kid you not, 800 storyboards for this movie.
Really? So you did your own storyboards? I
did. I think no matter what, I'm going to do that. Even if one day I get to hand that off to a professional who can take that and beef it up and make it, much prettier than I do. But one of the benefits of having 6 years to kind of on and off love affair with getting this movie going was, all right, it feels like it's real again. I'm going to dive back into the shot list, into the storyboards. And I like to do both, because the shot list kind of can, you download your brain onto paper in a way, and then I go read it. I'm like, oh yeah, that's how I wanted to shoot this. Or maybe it's changed. Like you said, maybe this location or this solution changes how you want to approach that. And you can pivot really easily because you've thought about it and you've seen it and you visualized it. And that only makes the people around you more comfortable.
Right. I was going to say, there's two types of pitch decks and lookbooks. There's the type that you use to pitch yourself to the project, which it doesn't sound like was going on here, because it seems like you were attached from the beginning. And then there's the type that you create specifically for your crew heads, so that everybody is on the same page about the color palette and everything else. So would you say that you designed these documents at all as pitching yourself to direct, or were they more for, cohesion with your crew?
It was more, it's always more for cohesion with the crew. Like right off the bat, you kind of want to sell in a nutshell quickly to the people you need to kind of do your song and dance for. And I did have to do that on this. Like, even though the writers loved me and I got to know the producer, Tom Butterfield, it took me in a room, first impression isn't always gold. Sometimes you don't get out the words out right, or sometimes you're nervous, or it doesn't go as planned. And if you can then be like, I'll just shut up and show you, show don't tell right off the bat. If you can do that quickly, I say that's the beginning stages of showing like kind of how you want to see the movie, and having references of other movies that you can point at. That's the biggest, because so they can be like, oh, cool. That, whether it's a money person saying that movie that made this X amount of money or whatever. And then on the side, you have your secret little agenda. You have your little, well, I'm not going to mention that this is the scene out of a Stanley Kubrick film, because everyone's going to be like, well, you're not Stanley Kubrick. You can't do that. It's like, well, I'll save that for the crew, keeping a cohesive tone conversation going. And, the money people don't need to hear that part of the conversation. And so ultimately, though, mine always are building blocks to making sure that when we start losing focus, you kind of have your Bible, your guidebook that you all can refer back to. And I say that if I disappeared on week 3 of the film, could my crew finish the film to the liking of my vision of what we talked about in those 10 weeks of prep, which we had 10 weeks of prep. We had 6 weeks of, unofficial development, 6 years of, but we only had like 5 weeks of prep. So it's like, you want to make sure that when you're filming, like if I vanished for some crazy reason, the movie could finish itself and be cohesive.
That's an absolutely great way to say it. I mean, that totally makes sense. And that is what those documents should do. But, I want to get into the movie now. So podcast listeners and folks viewing the Backstory Magazine YouTube page, where these Zoomcasts all go, if you have not yet seen Die in a Gunfight, it is being released in select theaters, and it's available on VOD. Press pause right here, go see it, and come back, because we're now going to get into the spoilers. So when you first came across the script, it's a loose contemporary adaptation of Romeo and Juliet. Obviously, it has those tropes, but with a bit of violence put in, because there's hitmen, there's assassins. What were some of the moments that leaped off the page to you when you first saw the script? And most importantly, tell us about your working relationship with the writers, because there's always a pass of the script that a director has notes for, and it's fun to hear some of the notes that you might have had. Absolutely.
Great. I mean, those are all great questions, because again, I read it and there's something bold that leaped off the page as I read it. It like, I'm a slow script reader and I just breezed through it. And it's because it had so many nods to, hey, basically telling me as a director, I felt like the writers, before I even knew them in person, were telling me, you get to take this, all the movie moments you've loved watching, even the kind of cliche ones or the ones that are the film school 101, like French New Wave nods or Pulp Fiction nods or whatever. It was almost like they're saying, take this and run with it, go play with it. Like they're in this for a reason. So that was all on the page. And when I met the writers, I was like, what's their angle? Is this an accident? Is this something that they just wrote when they were younger and because they watched a lot of movies with cool guns and hitmen and crime families? And but no, it was like they're, the way they even speak and the way they interact with each other. I was like, oh my gosh, it's like I'm hearing you speak like how you write. And so that right off the bat, we got along, and they knew that, I at least it felt like they trusted that I understood that I could inject all that fun, playful film language, the actual medium of show, don't tell, and how do you use all the fun movie language. They were basically, like I said, it was an invitation, a love letter to cinema saying, go do this. And for me, it was within the characters, it was within the narration, things that in the past on my other movies, I always say I would have been like, no, this is a movie thing. If this is the movie outfit, the movie costume, the movie set decoration, I'm always like, scale it back, like by 3, 4, 5, or 20%, 25%, because I want it to feel real. Whereas this is like, no, this is kind of a meta, self-aware, tongue-in-cheek movie. And those were the elements that I was like, wow, again, I can force myself to challenge myself to go outside my own comfort zone and make one of those films, all those movies, for me being fresh off of like, the Back to the Futures and Indiana Jones and all those fun movies you watch growing up. And then you start finding the Boogie Nights and the True Romances.
Right.
And I was like, well, can we make one of those? How about like, this is what that is. Like we can kind of do a fusion of that. And all these young people fresh off of Marvel movies and the way the comic book world looks, it's like, I wanted to make that for that 13-year-old who's going to be with his buddies, or that girl who's like, on a Saturday night, like, what is this movie? Stumble into it and have it be one of those strange movies that you want to share with people.
That's awesome. Do you remember any notes that you gave the writers of anything that you kind of wanted fleshed out a little more or changed? And, on that same subject, it's always fun to hear left turns, the way that a movie could have gone. You guys were convinced, you storyboarded it, you had props design, and then you're like, nah, we're not doing that. So those things are fun to hear as well.
I mean, I think it was, honestly, I was struggling with myself. I think I was like, it's all playful and fun on the page, but, I was even limiting myself. I still think I was like, no, let's keep this like that. Let's keep it how it is. And they were almost more willing to be like, look, the budget isn't, we can't maybe do this. So let's write it in here, how we display this in a fun, playful way. And it's almost like it was a challenge because it was like, we got to push ourselves in creative ways to convey things that we're not going to be able to convey if we have all the money in the world, or if we want it to just be, something more run of the mill or whatever. But a lot of the challenges, honestly, and changes in the script came from silly things that you wouldn't think of. Like, when you read a script and you're like, well, why don't they text? Why aren't they calling and texting each other more? And I always love in movies when they don't reference that's, they just kind of steer away from, it's more of a timeless thing. Like, the second you watch like the first Mission Impossible or something, which I love, but like, you see the technology and you're like, oh, that's not that cool of a phone, or whatever. So in this, I'm like, this is a world. I wanted to make sure my notes were like, I want to make sure this script reflects that this is not the real world. It's not necessarily a comic book world, but it's a world where, crime families do exist, where it's a little cartoony and they don't have to have phones. I don't want them to, there are phones in the movie, but we don't dwell on that stuff. They can have an old rotary phone and it's a statement to that this is a timeless world. So it was really the nuances of that sort of thing that I wanted to make sure were fleshed out on the page, so that when the production designers and the teams were diving into fleshing it out in real life, they knew where to begin from.
Well, it's interesting that a moment ago that you brought up, a comic book feel, because in this movie, especially for some of your exposition, but other scenes, you have this moving graphic image that
Yeah,
resembles a comic book,
sure.
and it seems like it's a way to kind of do flashbacks, flash forwards, get into characters' minds. When did that enter the process as a
Yeah.
concept, and was it something that you came up with that was going to be, I don't know, something maybe handled in post-production that you might not have been able to afford to shoot, or something that just artistically you wanted to interweave to give more of like a fairy tale version of this story?
Right. Great question. The animations are one of my favorite aspects of the movie, especially because right off the bat, it kind of puts you in a state of mind that it is a fairy tale whimsical world. And that's the tone that it's a hard tone to walk. And if you do that right off the bat, people know what they're getting into. And believe it or not, it's a combination of all of that. It's a combination of, we're filming wondering, you know what? There's backstory elements here right off the bat of the movie that set up the world that we don't know how we're going to do. We don't know how we're going to tackle this, because there was kids, there was stuff that we just knew we couldn't do. So we kind of put it on the back burner, knowing that we had to come, circle back to it. We were like, let's get the core. Let's get the 80% core of this movie in principal photography, knowing that we're going to kind of have to fill in the gaps. Well, we finished shooting in December of 2019. So we all had a little breather. We kind of came back into 2020, diving into post, knowing that we're going to start playing around with the whimsical, movie trope, kind of fun post elements of the split screens and the narration. So that was all there. But then COVID hit, and we got to hide away like everyone in the world. We locked up editing with no one over our shoulders. And that allowed us to explore more. But, as the movie kept coming together and you started feeling, as I started feeling, and the editor, no matter how much fun we were having with all the playful stuff, it was like, well, the heart and soul of the movie is still lacking. Some of the whimsy and the tone. It's like, how do we? And we knew what it was stemming from. It was stemming from all that stuff that we had put on the back burner because we didn't have money to film it during principal photography. And we were like, well, we can't go film it. So how do we do this? And I think it was Andrew that was like one of the writers who was like, what if we do animation? Because they can be locked up too. Maybe they need work. We don't know. And we started kind of putting feelers out there, and we found this awesome company that is experts in their field. They've worked on Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle cartoons, all these things that I love that were already nods in the movie. And right off the bat, we all knew, we were like, this is it. This is what we need. And, how do we handle it? And I feel like it was like, well, if it's all up front, if we start off the movie, if all the backstory, the setup to the playfulness is all here and that fairy tale vibe, then, people will buy into it and they'll believe anything that follows, or hopefully, or if that's not their kind of movie, then they know right off the bat, they're not like, they know right away, like you're starting off with a cartoon. I keep saying it's a 90s Nickelodeon that just happens to be rated R,
Bring on the green slime.
Yes. That's my generation. So I had the color scheme and that vibe pumped into it already. So it was just the icing on the cake with filling in those gaps, the plot gaps, and giving some heart and soul to it, but also style, like that.
If the pandemic didn't hit, were you going to try and sneak some reshoots, guerrilla style, live action?
I think that was my plan, because there's this whole subplot of this woman who it gets very muddy, and that's just one of the things that goes with not being able to film. But on the TVs, in movies, they always have exposition. They turn on the news, and there's the character who's going to spill the beans on that, and that's why this is happening. Those are elements that I for sure was going to be like, dude, we're going to go animals, guerrilla style, get some people, go shoot it really well, but we're going to do it here in LA. We're going to pepper it in as needed, shoot more if we need more. But yeah, that all kind of went out the window, and we had to do a little of that, and we really had to sneak it because it was just impossible to do back when the pandemic especially was like, right, what is this thing? Like, how bad is this? And of course it's bad and horrible, it's all horrible. I'm glad we're kind of coming out of it, but a lot of creative inspiration came from us being like, we got to come up with something. So yeah, I think my solution, it's far from what my original solution was, but I knew it was going to be in a vein of narration and leaning into those tongue-in-cheek, almost is the character going to turn and talk to the camera sort of thing.
Right. Did the writers get to rewrite some of that? Was that like an after effect as well?
Yes. You know what? I forgot about that. Like and this is where they're so amazing. They were there the entire shoot. They were there because this is such a personal project for them. They've been working on it for so long, and kind of that was one of the scripts that got their foot in the door and shows their personality, especially from their youth. And so they jumped at the chance to dive into these little backstories, and they fleshed out so many. It's almost frustrating because I wanted more of it, because they wrote backstories for the Wayne and Barbie, the Travis and Emmanuel characters, and other little clips. We even talked about, couldn't afford to crash a giant truck, and do this car chase. It's like, well, what if we write it, and they wrote all that stuff, and it was amazing because it was an extension of what we had already done. It wasn't trying to cover things up or fix things. It was just an extension of this weird character world. And yeah, we could only afford, even then we're like, okay, now we got to reel ourselves in again because they tackled it so efficiently and so playfully that, I wish there was more of it. But they were right there every step of the way, making the adjustments accordingly.
It looked great. I mean, I really like the animated stuff. I'm a longtime comic book fan, so it was cool to see the different styles blending together. What I liked about this as kind of in the Romeo and Juliet stratosphere is that one of the things that did to subvert expectations is that the parents absolutely hate Ben and Mary. Their parents hate them. In Romeo and Juliet, their parents love them, dote on them, want to keep them apart. And I thought it was just hilarious the way that Mary's mom had a scrapbook that she referred to as her failure scrapbook. Yeah. What were some of the things that you were able to do to play with that? Because it opened it up a little, in which this Romeo and Juliet really just do not care what the world thinks. Yeah. And they think it's actually almost funny to go against their parents here rather than fear them. They actually want to actively piss them off.
Absolutely. I love that you noticed that, because again, so many people you compare it to Romeo and Juliet, and it really is so different. And they, even as they wrote the movie, they said they didn't even have that in mind. It just kind of fell into place. But I love that. One of my things with Diego and Alex for these characters that was so important was they're not 16-year-old, teenagers who don't know the world, who want to go tackle the world together, who are starry-eyed, lovers that are naive. They're like kind of these broken, numb. What do we do with our lives? We're Ben, I feel like, wanted to join the 27 Club, the Kurt Cobains and the Jim Morrisons and Jimi Hendrix of the world. And he's lived past that. He outlived it. So he's like, well, now what do I do? And, to me, it's like, these can't just be, I guess 30-year-old, 40, 35-year-old whatevers who are just losers. They have to have they're trying to figure out how to live in a jaded time in a jaded world. And for me, the parents had to play into that. The parent roles were, they're so caught up in their stupid family feud that it means nothing to Ben and Mary. And that's why I think especially Ben and Mary, they're both so standoffish. And so even to each other at times, they challenge each other. They're not just naive. They know that there's more out there to the world that they can contribute. And are they going to do that together? Are they going to do that hand in hand? And no matter what, they're not angsty teens who are like, we want to defy our parents. It's like, no, we're adults. We don't want to be a part of your stupid club. And I think having the parents just play into that, intensity needed to happen. And the writers recognized that that scrapbook scene with her failures, that came a little later. That was like a weird little tongue-in-cheek thing that came about as we started developing those concepts and pushing those concepts. And we were like, yeah, this is great. We got to put that stuff in there.
Ooh, hey, I'm just jumping in really quick to remind you to check out Backstory Magazine over at backstory.net. You could read us on a desktop or laptop or via our iPad app, Backstory. Folks, we're just about ready to publish our Black Widow issue. It's filled with spoilers. We wanted to give people a chance to see the movie before we had all these in-depth conversations about it. So that is coming in your very near future to backstory.net. And look, if you've never read us before, I hope you check us out by reading our free issue. And if you dig the free issue, I hope you'll consider becoming a subscriber to support independent film journalism and to experience all that Backstory has to offer. You'll get access to anything we publish new in the course of a year. And of course, our archive as well, which we are continuing to add new old issues to, if that makes sense, in between publishing new issues. So yeah, it's kind of complicated. But look, it would really mean a lot to me to have my podcast listeners in iTunes and Spotify and my YouTube watchers of the Zoomcast that we are doing over on the Backstory Magazine YouTube page become subscribers. So I thank you for considering. And if you want to subscribe, feel free to use discount coupon code SAVE5. That will save you $5 off a subscription, and you could use it at backstory.net, which will still give you access to the iPad as well. Don't worry about that. Now, of course, while you're surfing around online, I hope you also tell your friends about Die in a Gunfight, because this was part of a virtual screening that we did to gain word of mouth for the movie. If this podcast intrigues you to see Die in a Gunfight, I hope you go onto social media and talk about it and say you heard Collin interviewed in this podcast. And if you've already seen the movie, of course, go on social media and talk about it, because that is basically what we could do as cinephiles during this pandemic, is to help illuminate independent film and help get the word out there. But speaking of Die in a Gunfight, let's jump right back into our conversation with director Collin Schiffli about his latest film, Die in a Gunfight. It was funny. I even like the trope of showing the old grudge, how it started between the families going back to the 1800s. That stuff was amusing as well. But, one of the things that I really liked that, comes down to performance and your direction of it. Of course, it was on the page as well, was the character of Wayne. He's just this random thrown in character that, is an assassin. That is an assassin with a moral conscience, an assassin who believes in love. He'll turn down assignments if they bother him, even in the middle of it. And just the direction. I'm just curious about your collaboration with him on that, because it was a really memorable character, and he always was kind of, you're just not entirely sure what he's going to do next. But it was funny to see that he was, hardcore, but also like a total softie.
Yeah. Everything you said hit the nail on the head. That was my favorite character when I first read it. And I knew I wanted that character, him and Barbie, but him especially, to be the ones, that you walk away saying like, he totally stole the movie in a way, like he's the one that you want to dress up for us for Halloween, or have the poster of on your dorm room wall. And in order for that to work, it's such a wild card character. You need the actor to almost embody all of that too. And I think that's why Travis Fimmel is so perfect for it, because he is a wild card in real life. He's the type that you're like, where'd Travis go? Oh, he's sleeping on set behind the flat or whatever. And you gotta reel him in or whatever. And a lot of those, the conversations, again, it was on the page, but Travis brought so much of his own flair to it. And he had this idea. So he showed up with a script full of crazy scribbles and notes and drawings, and he had these ideas. He wanted to paint his nails because him and Barbie probably paint their nails together because they love each other that much. And they have the tattoo, which was in the script, but taking that to another level. He's so intimidating visually as Travis in front of you, the beard and the piercing eyes, and he's so rough. He could knock me out in one punch or one little flip of his finger. But it's like what you said, the most important part of his character is that he has that moral compass, and that him and Barbie embody what Ben and Mary could be, and their love for each other, and how they can tune out the world and not care about anything else, as long as they're in it for the right reason. And Travis brought that big teddy bear quality. There's a moment where he works so well with Emmanuel. There's a part where they're in the truck, and it's after you've had this wild night with them, and you think they're just weirdos. What is this swinger thing going on? And then, they have this little soft moment where he's like a little teddy bear, and he's like, does his little arm thing, like, I'm strong for you, baby, kind of thing. And they have their little, they made all that up themselves. They were like,
oh, that's interesting.
They brought that day. Travis walks around the truck, and she does this little pew, and he's like, oh, and it's like, that's when I was like, those are the lightning in a bottle moments that it's on the page in so many words, but they took it, without even discussing with me some of those things. And that's when I'm watching the thing going, I'm watching this as I'm directing it, knowing that I'm watching something that feels like I'd be watching on TV and be like, whoa, that's interesting. What a cool choice. What a great approach to these characters. And I think it goes without saying that, yeah, they're wild characters. So naturally I let them loose. I was like, just go play with it and I'll figure out where to reel you in. But I really didn't have to.
How many cameras were you shooting with?
It was one camera, except for we had designated days with 2 cameras. And that was new for me, which I thought I would be like, this is tricky. This is difficult, but I loved it. Cause you're like, there's always a camera filming something, and that's what I love. I love capturing those moments of kind of letting the feeling that the camera or the camera operator doesn't know necessarily, when it's too perfect and the frame's too perfect. And there's stuff in this movie that if I could do again, it's like, there's always something that you wish you could change or work on. And I don't like when everything's perfect and you see everything nice and neat. And I like it when it's a little where it feels like the camera operator is like, I don't know. Oh, I didn't know you were going that way. I'm one step behind the actor. And so the B camera did allow us to do that. It's just kind of like, let's get that guy covering over here. Because again, that climax is like, that was a challenge, having everyone on set.
Yeah.
At once. It's like,
we'll get to that in a second, but before that, even you have gunfights, you have, fist fights. And I'm guessing this is really your first time working with a formal stunt coordinator and, possibly even second unit doing some of the action. You tell me on that. What were some of the brief lessons that you learned of kind of getting into, the more formalistic way that action is shot with stunt coordinators and second units?
Sure. I mean, we did. We had a great stunt team. They if there was any rehearsal in the movie, there was a little of that. And having people like Travis, who, coming off of Vikings and stuff, was so athletic in that regard of knowing how to communicate that stuff. It was a learning lesson for me. But it was great because, again, it shows you what you can prep. It shows you 1 or 2 weeks in advance what you can come up with, and then getting the actor there to be a part of it, saying, okay, I don't think my character would punch like that. My character maybe has the scrappy thing. My character does this. So you can incorporate a lot of the story and the character beats in it. But having professionals who can adapt like that. But here again is the lesson is, just like everything, it was so prepared. But when it came time to filming, we had to throw out half of it throw it out the window because of how condensed things became. Like we had
really. So like you realized the timeline, you wouldn't have enough time to actually record it properly.
Yeah. So we're like, you know what? We gotta figure this out. And again, I'm sure there's a world where that would, frustrate a lot of people and they'd be like, we put so much work into this, but we had, we were able to adapt. I remember our stunt guys, there was a scene where Diego comes through the window and Mario is supposed to smash a vase over his head. And we just didn't have time. I was like, this scene is too important emotionally to waste time trying to get this stupid vase scene moment to work. So we side tabled the vase. We did the scene. And I thought it was worked out the best it could. But then later when we had a shortcoming of time with Travis fighting some of the goons, and it's like, well, we can't do this, and this, but we need something here. Hey, we have that vase sitting there. Can Travis smash the vase over the guy's head? So it was like kind of like, again, run and gun navigating, but only because we were so prepped ahead of time with the professionals knowing how to handle it, knowing how to step up to the plate. But I mean, like the movie theater scene, we were supposed to have a full day of that. Then it became a half day. And then I'm not joking, we filmed the entire movie theater sequence in an hour, maybe an hour and a half.
Wow.
And everyone, I know stories get blown out of proportion, but that is fact. Like, it was a miracle. We had one take of each moment, each beat in that movie theater. And if we didn't have, the talented crew and camera operators and my DP and the designers and the up on screen, we had that prepped out that I didn't want a green screen of the movie playing in the background. I wanted it actually playing, that we had the light and all that stuff.
Right.
We were only able to do it in an hour. I was biting nails the whole time, but like, because everyone was ready to go.
This movie could have ended a bunch of different ways. Mm-hmm. Were there other variants, about who lives and who dies that you played with, or was it pretty much as the script went?
It was pretty much as the script went, but it was a lot of conversation of how that could unfold, and how maybe, because again, as you film a movie, the actors are even finding things about the characters and their story arcs. And as you know, bigger picture director, you want to make sure that you're getting the arcs and you're making the bigger picture make sense the best you can. But sometimes you deviate a little because you're finding out that, you know, like the Mary character became so strong. And so again, she's so cerebral and so like kind of cold in the coolest way. Like to me, she's cooler than Ben, because Ben's like trying to be cool, whereas she's just like can stare right through you. And part of that is her piercing eyes, you know, being able to do that and convey that with her eyes. But, you know, to your question, you know, we applied that to, you know, her kind of badass nature going into the climax of how she confronts head on this antagonist and how to convey that stuff and make it make sense. And yeah, it pretty much ends how it was on paper, but I think it was still handled a little differently. I don't know if I could explain it, but
well, yeah, because I mean, I was just curious if there was ever a version where Ben dies. You know what I mean? Because it seems like he's going to die, but then he's kind of revived.
And that's the thing. What I love is I don't like necessarily wrapping up everything in a nice little bow, but this movie, you could say does that, or you could say maybe Ben did die. Maybe that's why that last moment is kind of that filmic look where they're, again, spoiler, as we know we're talking about, but they're driving and he turns and winks to the camera and they're clearly in front of a stylized screen. And
right. And there's a little bit of comic book stuff happening too. Yeah. So you could say that some of that's, yeah.
You know, maybe that didn't happen. Maybe he did die, or maybe, you know, and again, a lot of people, it's like, no, he lives happy ever after. It's great. That's the movie. That's the narrative. And that's great too. But I would even argue if you want to sit and have those late night movie conversations, I would argue that Ben maybe even dies in the beginning of the movie in the alley. And none of it happens. And that's why it's all, you know what I mean? And again, that's like, you can take it and run with it in any way you want, but
some Jacob's ladder action there.
Yes, exactly. But you know, and again, that's why there's narration. That's why there is, you know, that whole ending to me is just a whimsical fairy tale. I love that you use the word fairy tale. You're the first one to say that. And to me, I appreciate that because it is a fairy tale. You know, you can get caught up in conversations or read about someone will say something like, that's not how that works. It's like, well, this movie has its own rules, you know,
right?
They're movie rules. And so the ending that applies to the ending. And I think maybe on the script, it might've been more concrete of what it was, but I love the notion of it's not wrapped up nicely. It could be what it's your interpretation. But at the same time, you should feel good leaving the movie. I didn't want that to be I didn't want to be murky or muddy in that regard of what you feel. And regardless of what happens to Ben and Mary, it's like, well, at least I want you to feel good that there's an uplifting kind of, there's a French song playing. That's like another nod to kind of the French New Wave stuff.
Right.
But happy and kind of upbeat, singing about love and stuff. So it's up to your interpretation, but you know,
well, that's good to hear that you know, you're leaving it up to the audience's interpretation in one version of it. You know, editing is the last stage of storytelling. What was something that surprised you about the movie in the editing room? Be it a scene that you had to cut and there was a lesson of like, oh, I wish I would have known that earlier so I didn't waste time on that day shooting this, or just, you know, something interesting that people might like hearing about that was cut.
For sure. I love the editing phase. It's my favorite phase because, you know, they always say, especially for film students, we all know it's like, the beginning is the script is one thing, you shoot something different and then it becomes something different again, all within the same vein, but all different animal at the same time. And I was spoiled because my first two movies, especially my first one, Animals, the first cut was 3 hours long. And not that it was like, 3 hours and I wanted it to be 3 hours. It was just like, we just had so much material somehow. And that came with the guerrilla nature of run and gun. We're going to film those pigeons. We're going to film that. We're going to redo that. Whereas this was much more planned out because of the style. It was much more to a T. So in Animals, I feel like it is more true to my vision in some regard than any of my other works because I was able to cut out 90 minutes of garbage and still have a 90-minute awesome movie, in my opinion, you know, whatever. Whereas this is like the first cut of it was like 97 minutes or maybe, you know, it was not, I was like, oh boy, we can't cut stuff out. Again, we made up for a little
right,
time.
and you added footage by doing animation, but you know,
that helped.
Right, and with 23 days, like it makes sense that there wasn't a lot cut. Is there any scene that comes to mind that you had to take out?
Yeah. So one story, I wish Tom Butterfield, our producer, was here because he loves this. I don't know if he loves the story, but he can speak to it so well. There's a moment, the moment in pre-production that kind of won over him and won over some of the people, when I pitched my vision, was this scene that now happens in animation, but we filmed it. There's a scene where Mary, gets sent off to boarding school, and so we did like a teenage version of her, kind of dressed her grungy and had a different hair, and she had a hat on, and a limo pulls up, and my pitch was like, wouldn't it be cool to save money budget wise, but also this was kind of became the catalyst of how I saw the movie, the style of the movie, the language, the actual film language of the movie was, as a teenager, Mary was going to literally walk out to the car that pulls up, the limo that pulls up. She gets in, and then we track with her, and she gets out the other side, and she's, an adult. It's adult Mary, and we do a secret little hidden cut in there. We filmed it. It worked great. We loved it. It's in, actually, for the DVD, anyone who still watches DVDs and Blu-rays, we talk about this in the commentary. We show the scene. It turned out great, but it was one of those things that we're like, it doesn't fit. We need something a little punchier here. We need something a little faster. So ironically, it was what sold the producers on me directing the movie, and what they loved, his favorite scene, of course, is always the one you got to cut. And we're like, the cool style moment is the one we have to cut. But yeah, again, we found the animation. The animation gave it the energy at the beginning of the film that it needed, whereas that scene kind of slowed it down a little, even though it was cool to look at. But that was just one example. A lot of it didn't get cut. That was probably the hardcore thing that got cut. It really was the playing of things, like, oh, let's do more split screen here. Let's do less split screen. That's
style, basically.
Yeah, style. That's what we really played with in post.
I know we're running out of time, so I definitely want to ask, what was your toughest scene? What was the scene as a director, you felt really challenged on set, and how did you creatively, breach the challenge?
The toughest scene, without a doubt, was the club scene, for frustrating reasons, independent filmmaking reasons. We didn't have enough extras. There were supposed to be like 100 extras. For whatever reason, there was like 40. So right off the bat, we show up with this elaborate scene planned, and it's like, there's no one in the room. There's no one here. How do we do this? And that mixed with the fact that once we get into their little rice paper room, the scene with Wayne and Barbie, and that was an 8-page day. So naturally, 8 pages is so hard to film, 8 pages of dialogue. And we only had 1 day to do it, 1 day to do all of it.
That's crazy. That's crazy.
It's literally impossible. We kind of backed ourselves into a corner, but you kind of like, we'll figure it out. But here's the biggest challenge. And again, we're all on the same page. We're all on the same team. This is no one's fault. I wish there's part of you that's like, wants to point a finger at someone, or what could have I done better? But we all stepped up to it. But in that scene, like, that scene just kind of became a handheld crazy scene, which is great because it supports the aesthetic of the characters and the Travis crazy energy. I wanted it to be this weird, crazy, weird sound effects and cartoon sound effects kind of vibe. So the handheldness works, but I had a whole different approach planned. With more deliberate shots and pushing tracking shots and stuff that just had to go out the window, because one, at the start of the club stuff, there wasn't enough people. So we had to make it feel way more frenetic and crazy, which again, kind of supports the overall feeling of the movie. So it's fine. But Diego, our lead actor, we shot that on a Thursday. He had to do some kind of promotional thing unrelated that he had to fly to over the weekend. And I knew he was going to be on Friday. So we scheduled this 8-page day on the day before he left. I was under the impression he was taking a red eye out or something, or leaving early the next morning. Well, about 2 hours into shooting this 8-page scene, when I thought we were for once on schedule and going pretty well, they came up to me and like, Diego's got to be to the airport in like a couple hours.
Oh,
and
my
I'm just
God,
like,
that's terrible.
It was like, and this was like week 3 when we're already all exhausted, but we can read each other at least. But it was just an unfortunate kind of scheduling thing that I did not know how to handle. I literally was like, I'm pretty chill. I'm very chill. I never blow up or anything. We're all get along. Like I said, we're all on the same team. But I remember being like frozen, because I was like, one, this is like Travis's first day. I didn't know him well enough he could have walked. Him and Emmanuel could have been like, what do you mean? Like, and we couldn't reschedule. We couldn't, like, everything was affected in a way that we had to do the scene. So it became like power hour, just film, keep the cameras rolling and just do it a million times as fast as you can. And, it's disheartening because that scene was supposed to be so much more, but of course everyone stepped up and brought what they could. And I don't think it betrays the energy of the movie and the feeling and what needed to happen. But if I could reshoot something, that would definitely be something I'd want to reshoot because, we had our writer, it's a fun anecdote. One of our writers put on the Diego outfit, the Ben Hero outfit, and stood opposite of, and again, Travis was the team player. He just did it anyways. He was in his whole world.
Were they doing over the shoulder stuff? Like you were?
Yeah, we did we shot out Diego and then we just were winging it over the shoulder, and, they had fun with it. There's a playful moment. I got to track it down where Travis literally, as a little love tap to the writers, this part where they're going to fight Rumble, and he literally smacked the writer just so in a playful, fun way. And it was just so funny because, like, again, everyone just stepped up, the fact that the writers were willing to do that. And, it felt like film school all over again, but
that's good that you got through it. I mean, that would definitely be harrowing. But look, you've been very generous with your time. It was fun watching this movie. I like that you were mixing different formats together to continue telling your story, even when you couldn't get the footage to do it the way that you wanted. You invented the footage, which I thought was cool. So yeah. I can't wait to see what you do next. Thanks again for chatting today, Collin.
I appreciate it. Thanks for having me. It's a blast. I could nerd out with this stuff all day, especially with people like you and our audience who's into this stuff. So I hope people can really sink their teeth into it and just have fun as they watch it.
Cool, man. Thanks again. And that's how the Q&A went down. Special thanks again to director Collin Schiffli for being so generous with his time and coming down to chat about his latest film, Die in a Gunfight. And folks, remember to spread the word about Die in a Gunfight. During these strange times with movie releases and the pandemic, it is really important for cinephiles to share their love of discovering movies with each other. So I hope you'll go on social media and talk about Die in a Gunfight. Help spread the word. Thanks a lot for doing that. And of course, while you're surfing around online, I hope you also check out Backstory Magazine over at backstory.net. You could read us on a desktop or a laptop or via our iPad app, Backstory. And we're just about ready to publish our big old Black Widow issue. It's got a lot of cool stuff in it. We wanted to give people a chance to see the movie before we got into so many spoilers because we covered all. And there's a lot of cool stuff in the magazine. You'll be able to check out our table of contents at backstory.net. So I hope you do that as well. And, if you want to check us out, you've never read us before, you could read the free issue. And if you like what you see, you could use coupon code SAVE5. That's SAVE and the number 5. It will save you $5 off a 1-year subscription to Backstory Magazine. You could use that coupon code at backstory.net. It will still give you iPad access. Don't worry. And look, it would really mean a lot to me to have my podcast listeners and iTunes and Spotify and my YouTube watchers of these Zoomcasts on the Backstory Magazine YouTube page support my passion projects. So thanks for considering. The Q&A with Jeff Goldsmith is a copyright of Unlikely Films Incorporated in 2021. All rights reserved. Folks, if you ever want to get a hold of me, you could reach out on social media via Twitter. I'm Yo Goldsmith. And I also run the Backstory_mag account, which is, of course, our magazine. And you could use those same handles over on Instagram as well. Yo Goldsmith is me and Backstory_mag. I have a Facebook fan page. I do need to check it more often than I really do. So I'll try and do that as well. If you ever have any questions you want to email, you could always email backstoryletters@gmail.com. I promise to not get back to you immediately. No, look, the email box gets a little clogged sometimes, but I do like to go through it. And I do like to hear what everybody has to say and get back to them. So just give me a little time on that. But look, I'm Jeff Goldsmith, the publisher of Backstory Magazine and the host of the Q&A, thanking you for tuning in and telling you to stay out of trouble. Till next week.